Hello everybody and welcome to H630, and this is the first lecture in a long time that I finally have somebody live listening to me. It's my privilege to introduce Kalle Lundahl, who's once back together with us, and I get a human being live present that I can address. So I thank you for the patience, having listening to me being half dead, because it's very hard for me to imagining people sitting behind the screen somewhere. I hope it got a little better during this time, but now everything is coming back to life once more. We have a partly sunny day today here in Gothenburg. Nice temperatures. Even the sun is looking at us. So it feels uplifting. And oddly enough, leaves are still hanging on to the trees, which is like encouraging. Because here in Sweden we have a long month of November, and somehow when the leaves are falling off, it gets very lonely visually. So the longer they stay, the better there is. And what will take them away is a storm eventually. We have the November storms. But so far, knock on woods. I will talk about personal experience today. I'm going to make it a bit light after Carl Pribram and partly David Bohm, who are, I had to mention, is very tough. When it comes to David Bohm, it's new words who have very little connection to what we usually think. These words, albeit few, need to be learned somehow bodily, and they cannot be translated. And I would say they are even tougher than the Heideggerian words, because Heidegger's words do make sense when you think about ontic and ontological. And if you keep that in mind, some of the words become a lot more easy. He wants to avoid the amnesia that ontic thinking makes. That clue we do not have when it comes to David Bohm. We have to make do with a picture. And one usually says that the picture says more than 1,000 words. And that's a good thing, but it can also be a difficult thing, because no picture on this planet is absolutely clear. Well, let's start. I call today's lecture the holistic group, and this is a memory for me years back when I was living in Majorna, and I have some contacts with a couple of groups, and they more or less call themselves holistic. They want to take in all of the world, and they wanted to be what they call non-dual. And the method they were practicing, you could say, was trying to change the representational idea of the world, trying to change how you perceive the world. And what happened when they did that, they became more at peace. Their thinking wasn't as, how can you say, as tough, not as stressed. They became calmer. And when they became calmer, they also became nicer to the surrounding world. They could easily concentrate at work, together with the family, maybe at school. Some people said they could concentrate better when driving, doing different things like sports. So it was all good. But I am thinking here, and especially in context with quantum physics and Julian Barber, who are also holistic. But I think there is a difference in how far you take the holism. And when Julian Barber says everything in this world is in reference to something else, he means that quite literally. Nothing is excluded in this holism, which makes it a bit different, I'd say. And this could also be a clue how you can make this that I term change of the representations go hand in hand with another change. You can have two changes and they will help each other. And this thing I call synergetic. And synergetic is a term originally from Greek, but it come to mean in the Western world that different things sort of add to each other and enforce the effect or what happens. Especially in medicine, I think. If you go to the pharmacy, a pharmacist will talk to you and inquire what other medication you are taking. And that is because of the synergy effect, synergistic effect. If you take two medicine, they can make both medicine be much stronger. And although it sounds very counterintuitive, we know that is happening. And this is what I meant here. If you put in more of different things, you become much stronger, more than the two forces you add. So my question, which I for some reason written in Swedish, I apologize for that, but this is the first time with a whiteboard in a while, and I'm used to Swedish. I have to translate vad innebär helhet. What does wholeness mean? And I made a circle here, and I feel that with Swedish as well. But whereas the letters you won't be able to see the letters anyway, I can just tell you. These are examples what could be the foundations for wholeness. I put up work here, put home up here. I also put movement. We have a bodily movement, we move in a certain way. We had body and health, and when I mention body here, I mean from the aspect taking care of the body, doing exercise. Health could mean, do you sleep enough? Do you take sustenance that is good for you, food that sort of brings health and strength to you? And I also take those things like compassion, which I think is very important. In the Vedic tradition, you have niyama and yama, and those we often interpret as being of ethical nature of some sort, moral nature. But I would say all these things, and even compassion, is part of the wholeness. It cannot be excluded from the whole thing. And I think rather that is what the Vedic thinkers were trying to point at. So if you want to change something, you have to also get those aspects in life, because we are human beings, and we thrive on compassion. We thrive on human beings being in harmony. And if you're looking for some sort of harmonic, holistic approach as these groups, they should add compassion actively as well, not just training their representation and getting the effects. Why not also add that you consciously train compassion and those things to get the wholeness in? I call something social. It's not a term I really like. It feels very cold. I know it's coming from Skinner, which doesn't help the situation. Skinner was a very cold-hearted person, and he didn't believe even that human beings had an inner thing. If they had, he said, it's not important. But I'm going to use that term anyway. And that will include your relationship to your family, to your friends, to work colleagues, to people you meet occasionally as well, in the shop or on the street, all those things. And of course, nature. We are coming from nature, we are part of nature, and I mentioned before about Indians and people coming from so-called primitive cultures in Namibia and so forth. They are very, so to speak, part of nature. They know everything about nature. Nature is their surrounding, I would say, in a much more definitive way. We Westerners, we have a tendency to cut out the surrounding, whatever that might be, but they take it in, both as they turn things around them, they look at things around them, and they have associations to them. One interesting part when I read about the Indians was they know every plant, every fruit, every animal, and they also can make connections to myths, personal stories, stories that other people told you, and this makes the connection to the surrounding world so much stronger, and that's part of the wholeness. And art. What will we be without art? The aesthetic is very important as well, and that all the things around us at least have the intention of being beautiful and being presented in the way that doesn't do the thing disservice. And this arty thing could be aesthetics, cleanliness, and all these different holistic groups had clean places and that were decorated to some extent. The house in itself was quite dreadful. Some parts of it even reminded me of the horrors of room number 9. They were lacking wood, it wasn't feeling natural. The building itself was something that was supposed to be torn down, which is today. So it didn't give this wholeness thing. You didn't get anything from the locale we're in, and that's a very, very important part of the wholeness. And I see here the idea these people brought into the holistic groups were things they already had in their heads, and that was the idea that some parts of reality it simply doesn't exist or something. And the interior was one of those things they thought didn't exist. Many of the influences for this holistic group are coming from the East, India, and I think it was China and Tibet and those places. And in those places, you always start by building the house with an intention there to be holistic, beautiful, having all this quality of being already in that state you want to come to. And I'd say they never do any separatedness. They don't they're not being satisfied with the house that's supposed to be torn down. Of course, there are economical reasons for this as well. You can't be able always to build a house, but it's something to be kept in mind, I think. And I think when you add, of course you can't add everything at one time, and you shouldn't. It's going to be staggering. But if you, so to speak, try to develop these things, what is part of your existence, when you stop making a barrier between yourself and the surrounding world, you are already helping the process. And that's why I'm specifically interested in art, because having a nice building is, then you are already there in the goal of wholeness. And I think that makes it so much easier, because you're already dressing into the costume of wholeness. You have an environment that is already whole, gives wholeness. And of course, it should be the right fractals. We know that fractals has a very big influence on both our bodily balance, but also on our thinking processes. So those things are extremely important. You can make a comparison, for instance, if you want to begin with playing golf. One of my neighbors is a golfer. When he started to play golf, he went to the shop first. He bought a special costume. He had special attires. He had special tools. And also in the club there is a special way of being. You show people more respect. You're always being polite. And then you are assuming where you want to go. You already have a format that is the goal. Respect each other. It's already there from the start. And I think that helps a lot. And this is what I mean with synergetic. You try to find all the different streams that going in the same direction, and you almost even jumping a bit ahead of yourself. And why not? I think that is what we usually do, and that's for a good reason. I can have a personal example. I had a friend who wanted to become a doctor. And long before he started his education, he started changing himself, being more doctor-like. And he took the whole thing to ridiculous levels. I remember even at one instance he was walking around with a stethoscope. But long before he even went to a hospital. But I understand the thinking. There is something good in that thinking, because if you put that into your body, it becomes embodied, and that will make the whole transgression so much easier. And well, I'd say I don't know so much about doctors. I wouldn't recognize a doctor in civil clothing, but I don't have any problem in this neighborhood where we're recording this way. We're next to a police station. And I think when I'm in the store and I see somebody in civil clothing, I can tell directly that's a policeman. I bummed up only one time, and I had good reasons for that, because I wasn't in balance myself. But I went down to the local store, and there were 3 people as I perceived to be bums. They were wearing sloppy clothing, they were unshaven, they smelled, their hair was upside down, and one was holding an alcohol bottle. And what these people did was sort of grabbing the owner of the shop. And for me, that was completely weird, and I was thinking of doing something. I thought something wrong is happening here. And I directly heard this clear voice, "Back off, backa." When I heard that voice, I realized those were not bums, those were actually policemen. But they tried to cover up what they were doing. They've been undercover cops. And maybe that was the reason I didn't realize they were actually cops. You don't often see a cop with a brandy bottle in his hand either, unshaven or being untidy. They were arresting the shop owner. It turned out he was selling tobacco on the side. Underneath the store, it was a huge warehouse full with tobacco. It was tons of it, and he sold it. And they tried to find this thing out. But otherwise, usually it's not a problem. They walk in a special way, and you can see the ones that walk most in that special ways are the young ones, the one who's learning. So they're imitating themselves into the knowledge. And I think it could be a much greater idea to do this with all these different parts of the totality. because that will certainly place you at the goal much quicker. And this, of course, is inspired by David Bohm, the implicit, the explicit, because when we usually have this clear-cut division between what is a representation, and this we've been discussing a lot the last 600 lectures. What is representation? And we criticized it, we see problems with it, we looked at artificial intelligence, science of cognition, neurology, and we've seen how much problem the idea of representationalism is causing. But a question that came to my mind after reading David Bohm is that the people who believe in representations, they never ever tell you what does representation consist of. That's a no question you want answer, or where you won't even put it. What is representation? And of course, here you have the age-old mind-body problem. And I think, and this maybe it's a bit radical, but I think the mind-body problem is something that these people, me including, until recently at least, and probably to some extent still, try to sort of put under the carpet, forget about, because it's a hard problem, it's called a hard problem, why not shove it out? But instead you remain with the representational problem. This is what we have instead of mind. As we have, instead of the soul, we have the mind, we have the psyche, and now we think that we solved the problem by just having representations. But what are the representations made of? Where are they coming from and where are they going? Well, obviously they are a bit more than scribbles on a piece of paper. Nobody will say that, because they have a force. And there is a problem here. It's a definite paradox. Nobody answered the questions, what are representations really made of? And not material, that I know, that's what they usually say. But there's something else, otherworldly. And I think, and here Julian Barber comes to mind, look out when you perceive something otherworldly. When the person says this is not of this world, you should look out, because that is usually a fault in thinking somewhere. And I think representation should be replaced by implicit, explicit. It makes a lot more sense. And the thing is, you don't have this mysterious substance that doesn't exist anywhere, never will come into existence, but we still are thinking it is somewhere. With implicit, explicit, you have more or less the same substance, but it's just different aspects of it. It's coming from the same point. You could call it material, you could call it mental. It doesn't really matter what you call it. It seems to be both at the same time. No need to define it. What you need to know is rather how it's working, because it's in the working process the beauty comes out. And I think this is coming from the Western tradition of marginalizing, prioritizing. This I've written in Swedish here, kan man marginalisera, prioritera, and that should be in English. Could you marginalize, could you prioritize? Well, you can do it to a certain level and to a certain extent, but you shouldn't base your whole worldview on marginalization, prioritization, because you can't affect the world that way. You can't say that one thing is more important than the other, and you end up with a whole bunch of problems. One thing that was a complete relief to me, that was how David Bohm looks at thinking and movement. Because for me, it actually never ever made any sense to have this idea. First comes an intention, and then for some reason you have a movement. There doesn't seem to be a connection between these two things. And I always felt it was a gap in between. And that gap I just ignored because I didn't have an explanation for it. And to be honest, the solution made by Descartes, that to say that there is no connection between thinking and bodily movement, maybe it's better than any other solution, because it is caused by how we think about the world from the beginning. We are doing marginalization, we are prioritizing, and that is bound to end us up in some problems. So implicit, explicit. And what I suggest for the holistic society is that they take in the other parts of the world, and thereby making not only, so to speak, representational change of the explicit, the thinking processes, because they're also going to add the implicit. Because we are put into the world. We have a bodily experience of the world, and that experience is incredibly much stronger than just keeping to what's explicit, what we have in our head. We know for a fact only a couple of % reaches to the conscious awareness. So why settle for that? Why not take in the whole world? Even if you don't know about all these things. You should have like firm rules how you treat other people. You should have firm rules for how you work and all those things, because they're going to help the whole process. And what you could add a system, for instance, when it comes to social, that you have some rules for how to treat other people. You always say good morning, good afternoon, you say thank you. That will help somehow, even if you don't feel like saying it all the time, even if you don't feel that the other person deserves it or whatever. But it's better to be proactive, to do it before, because then you put down your feet and you have a clear intention and you have an action that follows it. And what's happening now is that you are doing more, much more. All of a sudden you're doing much more, and you will from that get a lot of benefits. Just by acknowledging the world, with not shutting the rest of the world out. All this is part of the world. Acknowledge that, and you already made a fantastic step towards reality, just by acknowledging it. You don't even have to be very good with these things. But by acting, you enforces the reality of the world. You get something almost for free. You don't have to do that much actually, especially not in the beginning. But what you will earn is that you tell your bodily system, you tell your thinking that the world is real. You interact, you do your stuff. And it could be anything. It's like not throwing garbage on the street. It could be taking care of somebody who's lost. It could also be that you are taking care of your own stuff, shaving, which I haven't done today. But the examples are myriad. These different aspects will feed it into reality. And this is the movement between what's implicit and what's explicit. This is the unfolding and then the enfolding of everything. And this is what David Bohm called the hollow movement. You get a direction. And this direction is completely lacking today. I don't think I will offend anybody by saying that, but we lack a direction today. We are more or less lost. And the reason for that are a myriad different reasons, and we've gone into those reasons more than enough. But this is the way out of it. You create a wave, and even though this wave is not very strong from the beginning, it will, for every little step you make, become stronger and stronger. And this is very, how could I say this? Is hard to put. It's like if you have a stick of some sort, you want to build something strong, adding another stick and then some more sticks. For every stick you add, you get a stronger structure. So it's a good idea to add so many structures, pins as possible to make a firm structure. Because if one of these are loosening up, not becoming as strong, you have the other ones to lean on. And I think that metaphor is so close to how our bodies works, because we are also a sort of structure that build on helping beams. And when we take the whole into consideration, the background, what's up on top of us, I immediately feel grounded in the world. And what did I take in? Well, I take in all the relations out there. I put an interest into the world. And this is what I suggest here. And partly the reason for this lecture is sort of a, how do you say, an argument against or a complaint to somebody I've been mailing just 2-3 times. It's Michael Ashcroft in England, and he has very good points, so I shouldn't argue with him, but I do it indirectly anyway. And he shows that taking in the surroundings is extremely good. He's an Alexander teacher, and he took advantage of the corona crisis by building a whole new way of teaching ideas connected to the Alexander technique, and he took it out to Zoom and all those new tools for translating the ideas of Alexander to Zoom, which is quite incredible in itself. He's a very smart young man. And one of those things, what he could improve the posture in the person he's talking to, his student, by asking him or her to take in the background. But I've been thinking it could be even better for Michael to ask the person to take in more of the actual function in that person's world, not just to think about the background as just empty space or empty background, because it has features. And the more we are in relations to the features around us, the more we are being present. And I think that could be good to add that, because sometimes it becomes a little empty to just say, think about what's surrounding you. But I notice you can make that much stronger by having a personal connection to everything. Because in the end, you are a subject in the world. And of course, everything has to have a subjective side. Something that means something for you. It's your interest. So that's a very good reason, I would think, to put some sort of effort in getting into this. This is not for somebody else, this is for you. Because once you grow interest for these things, you also get the whole world more into your bodily system. And what you gain is balance, bodily balance. I don't know if I dare send this video to Michael Ashcroft, I think not. But it's at least a good argument. I might send him a mail if you, maybe Kalle will help me with a language. Kalle is very good at spelling and knowing how to put those words. But I think you should be informed of this aspect of the whole thing. It's not just to think what's behind you. You need to have some relation to it. And that is something that takes time. You create an interest. And I think that's a little bit similar. That you start a new hobby, it could be like sewing or drawing or something like that. In the beginning, it doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't say you anything. You don't have any relationship with it. But in the end, it becomes more and more personal. And in this process, you will notice more. I had that similar experience. One thing that I was completely disinterested in, was furniture. But at some job, I was encouraged to buy furniture. And to be honest, I couldn't tell one piece of furniture from another one. And actually I felt it was completely boring as well. Probably the most boring thing I could think of. But I found other things that were interesting. I got to travel a bit, not very far, but a bit travel. Contacting people, having chats with them, the things I like, so to speak. I like to chat with people. So I was pretty okay, more or less. I was just a bit bored by the furniture. But what I noticed in this interaction from the one who wanted me to do these things, some learning came in. Some of the things stuck. And I think it took me 3 or 4 months. I caught myself thinking about furniture when I was not working. And I think, how weird is that? Why do I think about work now? I'm off duty, I'm free. And then I noticed those thoughts were actually pleasurable. And if you would have asked me before, I would never believe that. I took some joy in thinking about furniture, the differences and how they looked and what was what, and some funny episode when I bought one piece of furniture and I thought it was worthless and it turned out to be very valuable. It became interesting in the process. And what you do, you find within yourself connections to the outer reality. You connect. For instance, this piece of furniture is called the Gustaviansk. And one of the typical traits is the rose. There is a rose in it. There's always a rose. And this is typical for the style. And when you come to think about it, you sort of get into the perspective this was invented somewhere during the reign of Gustavus III. And when you look at the furniture after a while, you can actually see that this is sort of a simplified French style, made Swedish. Fitting maybe the skill of the carpenter at that time, because it's simplified. But it has its own beauty. It develops its own style in Sweden. We had it for 200 years almost, and it developed to some extent. And it's more fitting in a way to have Gustavian furniture in a Swedish home than it would be to have the original, the Empire or something like that, or Rococo, because those maybe are too extravagant for the Swedish idea of simpleness, and we often have an environment in our houses that are much simpler than the French used to be, and still is, I think.
For our international audience, we can say Gustav III is around 1790.
Yes,
1790.
Yes. And so you see here, there is loads of connection. It goes into history, something I was already interested in. It goes into different perspective, which is really, really interesting. Comparing France to Sweden, different levels of understanding, different levels of skill in doing furniture, and the Swedish idea of simpleness, and it shouldn't cost too much either, because it should be something that regular farmers could afford. They wouldn't be able to afford something made of mahogany or teak. That was impossible. Therefore, you have to paint it. Most of the Gustavian furniture are painted. They're not. You can't see the wood as you can see with the Rococo or Empire. The wood is hidden. Why is that? Well, it has to do with it's usually beech, something you can afford in Sweden. And beech is not something that you should show. Book. It doesn't have this luxurious texture you would find with mahogany or cherry or teak or whatever they used for their Rococo, Empire or whatever they had. So I started out with something that I really did not dislike. And just by exposing myself to it, this was involuntarily, but it goes to prove the point anywhere. You can voluntarily, willful, put more interest in those things. And in the beginning, maybe some of these parts won't make any sense to you. Maybe you're not so into art. Maybe you're not so much into nature. But you can find your interest. And you will see in this idea of Bohm, the things being implicit, explicit, it's like threads connecting to each other. And you see, the threads are making the whole thing more stable. The more you add, the more stable it becomes. That's the synergetic effect. And before ending, I should just mention the Chinese writing system. That's frustrating, but it brings so many aspects into the picture. Aspects as you as a Westerner thinks initially, they have nothing to do with the whole thing. This is a piece of history, this is a piece of art, this is most usually some happenstance somewhere. But I see now they instead of being something clearly defined, something that in my mind I would have preferred. We Westerners are by nature universalists with what we like to have a generalized reality. A pen should be a piece of pen and nothing else. Shouldn't be decoration or something you have a memory of. It should be that thing and nothing else. But that system spreads all over the place. It doesn't stay anywhere. And I think this is another point with the Hollow movement. It goes through every part of the universe. And here you have one of the clearest explanations of the wave, because the wave is so hard to understand in quantum physics. How can a wave be anywhere or everywhere at the same time? It doesn't make sense. Because the wave, in my opinion, is something that is localized in some circumstance. Otherwise, how could it be a wave? It has to start somewhere, it has to end somewhere. Or at least it has to have mountains and valleys, up and downs. But this wave doesn't really correspond to that. But in this example that came originally from an idea of Bohm, when he presented consciousness and you could develop a proprioception of consciousness, come the idea of this. And this is the Hollow movement that shows that everything is coming from the same thing. But it's not same in the general sense. It's more everywhere. It's everywhere, it's penetrating everything, and it's giving force to things. So although my purpose of this was to have a sort of recommendation for the holistic groups, or the holistic group society as I called it, and vaguely be a criticism, not really criticism to Michael Ashcroft, it's a third purpose, because thinking about this is completely apart from what I try to show here, is that we understand how quantum physics works by using a completely different subject. And I think that is something that never been done before like that. So that is cheers to David Bohm for introducing me to that. And I think it's about time to round up here. I thank you very, very much for today. Bye.
Thank you.